Something that fans of anime will inevitably have to contend with as they explore deeper into this medium, and something that I have discussed, especially recently on the channel in a number of reviews, is this idea of stopping point endings. These are the kinds of endings that are not fully conclusive and satisfying. They do not resolve every plot point. They do not bring every character interaction to completion, but they do enough. They do enough satisfying things, resolve enough plot points to make whatever ending we are left with enjoyable enough, conclusive enough, while still leaving room to do a lot more and potentially to adapt a lot more if it is an adaptation, and there very likely is in these situations more material that has just been left aside to maybe come back to at some point, or maybe not. In fact, most likely not. There are many, many anime out there that have endings like this. Endings that are still good and potentially could still be praised by a lot of people, but still leave a number of lingering questions that make you wonder, well, what if we got that additional season? What if the story was fully adapted? What if everything was brought to its conclusion? And one show that I wanted to talk about that falls into this category is 2007's Kaiji. Kaiji is a series that, even if you haven't watched it, you've probably at least seen artwork of it and heard of it. This gambling series about this guy with a very particular character design. In fact, every character in the show has that type of character design with these thick outlines and the noses, especially the noses. It makes the show and the characters very distinctive, very memorable. These characters all look a little bit shady. They look like they've got something going on, like they are gamblers and cheaters and snakes. So it works very well with the type of setting and type of story that's trying to be told here. And the show definitely leaves its mark very early on. Kaiji himself is forced into a situation by way of someone who he thought was his friend, basically saddling him with a whole lot of debt that he could not realistically get himself out of. And so he is coerced by a debt collector named Endo to attend this game on a cruise ship, of course run by the company which has the debt that Kaiji now needs to pay off, and attempt to win big and ultimately get himself out of this situation that he never intended to be involved with in the first place. The results of this game will determine not just Kaiji's fate, but the fates of everybody involved in this game. And through strategy and a little bit of luck, Kaiji is able to sort of get himself out of the situation, but not entirely. Over the course of the first season, Kaiji is constantly trying to get himself out of this debt little by little, facing off in a variety of games that test him both mentally and physically. If Kaiji loses these games, it's not just, oh, he might get more debt or might not be able to pay off his existing debt. He might effectively get sold into slavery. He might literally die. These are incredibly intense games, and the show is directed in a way that makes that tension palpable. And nevertheless, Kaiji is able to find some sort of strategy to at least allow himself to progress further, to move on to the next stage, to the next life or death game. And we get a variety of options: gambling, card games, trying to get across a beam from one building to another and not literally fall and die if you slip. It will keep you on the edge of your seat. And I remember when I first watched Kaiji, I got through the first season in 2 days. It was that engrossing. But as the first season transitions into the second, which came out in 2011, you start to see the show lose some of that edge. The colors are a little bit brighter. The games are not exactly the same. And that's not to say the show and the setting and the situation Kaiji finds himself in is any less dark or dire. The beginning of season 2, Kaiji quite literally is sold into slavery. He is forced to work in these underground mines run by the company who he owes all this debt to, and the entire first half of the show is him trying to get out of these mines on a furlough. If somebody gets enough of the fake money that the company gives these people for working in these slave labor mines, then they'll be able to buy 2 days on the surface. And Kaiji's entire gambit is get to the surface and gamble in order to get enough money to finally pay off his debt. What's interesting about season 2 is it gives Kaiji something that he didn't really have for the most part in season 1, with the exception of one character, and that's actual friends, people who he bonds with, people who are in literally the exact same situation he was in, including the son of said friend from season 1. And considering this is a guy who, at the beginning of the show, is put into this situation where his life has been put on the line repeatedly because of a so-called friend, it is very powerful to see this character finally get some real friends who have been through thick and thin with him. Unlike season 1, season 2 really only has 2 actual games across its 2 halves, the dice game and then the pachinko game, whereas season 1 had multiple games. And I do think that hurts season 2 a little bit, because if you are not invested in those 2 games, there's not a lot here for you. Whereas season 1, it changed things up frequently enough that if you weren't super invested in the gambling arc on the cruise ship, maybe you'll like the one where they're doing card games. The other aspect of season 2 that I think dilutes the quality of the games from season 1 is that the games here are much more based on luck and based on out-cheating the opponent. That's not to say that you didn't have mind games and certainly cheating to some extent in the other games from season 1, but season 2 very much so is, hey, these are games of luck, a dice game and a pachinko game, so we are just going to cheat our way to victory and hopefully out-cheat our opponents who are also cheating their way to victory. And that in of itself is not a bad thing. Like, you can still have strategizing and mind games in order to out-cheat the opponent. The problem is that a lot of the cheating is stuff that's done prior to the game starting. Unlike in season 1, where a lot of the strategizing happened while the game was going on. So you could see characters like Kaiji be backed into a corner and have to come up with a solution on the fly. In season 2, both of the arcs largely involve the characters coming up with plans ahead of time and us just finding out about them while the game is going on. And I think, at least for me personally, that took away a lot of the intrigue in these games and figuring out how the characters were going to get themselves out of it. Because it's kind of difficult to look at a game and look at the rules and look at the ways they can be bent and manipulated and try as the viewer to think ahead towards how is Kaiji going to get out of it? How is his opponent going to try and get out of it? But at the end of the day, it's just they're going to come up with weird ways to cheat that you're going to be told about as the characters find it relevant to bring it up. I think this is especially the case in the pachinko arc, because some of the things that they do to try and cheat with the pachinko machine are just insane, and they're things that you would never be able to predict ahead of time. And you just kind of have to go with it when the characters tell you, oh yes, I bought all this space at the top of the building and put a bunch of stuff in there in order to weigh the building down a little bit so that the balls in the pachinko machine would ever so slightly turn in a different direction. It's just a little bit too much at times, and I do think it weakens the quality of the games compared to those from season 1. That being said, while I do think the arcs are not as strong, the games are not as strong, and the fact that we just have these 2 kind of drawn out games as opposed to the variety of games we had in season 1 does make season 2 a little bit lacking in comparison. What season 2 does do is bring in that supportive friend group for Kaiji, one that he has at the end of the show. And that is what gives season 2 of Kaiji this satisfying stopping point ending. That Kaiji has this supportive group of friends. A group of friends that hopefully will allow him to not get back into debt. Because something that has, on an unfortunate personal level, changed for Kaiji over the course of all these events happening in his life is now he does actually want to go and gamble. We see at the very end of the show, he has a little bit of money left after paying off his debt. And what does he do? He gambles it away. And you're kind of left with this thought that, hey, he might just get himself back into debt on his own. But there is that silver lining at the end that he has this group of friends that hopefully will support him and prevent him from doing so, because they all went through the same thing he did. Maybe not to the exact same degree and exact same extent, but they know what will happen if they get back into debt with this company. So we get this really satisfying end for Kaiji as a character and as a story. The debt is paid off. He has paid back his personal promise to his friend from season 1, and he has a group of friends to support him and hopefully look out for him that he very clearly did not have in season 1. And if he had a group like that in season 1, maybe he never would have gotten into the situation where he eventually found himself in debt because of the actions of his so-called friend at the very beginning of the series. So you might hear that and think, well, then what exactly is the problem? Why is this not a perfect, satisfying ending? Well, one thing that is very clearly laid out as a future obstacle for Kaiji at the end of season 1 is a rematch with Hyodo, the president of the company that he has been in debt with. At the end of season 1, they have this big confrontation and Kaiji loses, and loses dramatically. Because it ends with Kaiji losing, Kaiji having to be rushed to the hospital. It ends on a note where you want to see Kaiji face off against Hyodo again and beat him at his own game. But we never get that in season 2. In fact, Kaiji and Hyodo never interact throughout the entire second season. The only thing we really get in season 2 is Hyodo watching and commenting on Kaiji's performance in the pachinko arc. And that's fine. We see Hyodo get really pissed off that Kaiji is able to get out of this and pay off his debt. So we see that resentment building on the side of Hyodo, but we don't actually see it come to a head. We don't see the two face off against each other. And that is, unfortunately, unsatisfying. It doesn't ruin the ending of Kaiji, but it does leave this big elephant in the room that these two never get to have that rematch. And sure, you could argue Kaiji sort of beats him by getting out of his debt, sure. But we don't see a head-to-head matchup, and that's clearly something that the show was building up to that we never quite got to see. Notably, the source material for Kaiji does not end with what is adapted in season 2. There is an entire third portion to this story that has just never been converted into anime form. And had more of Kaiji been made, we hopefully would have gotten to see that final confrontation. Which of course raises the question, would Kaiji be better off if it had gotten that third season and given us that final confrontation with President Hyodo? Or is it better off the way it is, with a satisfying enough ending, a good enough stopping point that resolves most of the issues, most of the plot points? Is this really good, but not perfect ending, a better thing to have than a continuation that would address this thing that's left out in the open, but potentially takes away something from the ending we already have? And I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Kaiji is better off the way it is. Maybe it would have been better off if it got a third season. Maybe it would have been better just to add in a couple episodes at the end of this season where Kaiji did face off against Hyodo directly. Hell, it would have taken away some of the slog from the pachinko arc, so that probably would have been the way to go. And that is the question we have to ask ourselves as anime fans whenever this type of ending comes up. Is an anime with a stopping point ending good enough, or do we want to see more? Do we want to take the risk of losing this good enough ending to potentially get a better one? Is taking that gamble worth it? And I don't think there is a right answer to that situation, because ultimately, unless that continuation ends up happening for Kaiji or for any of the other shows in a similar position, we really won't know. And at this point, I don't really think Kaiji is likely to get another season, given that it's been so long since season 2. Granted, I say that when we just had Panty and Stocking get a second season after 15 years, so, you know, anything's possible at the end of the day. So maybe one day we will get an answer to this question, at least with respect to Kaiji. So let me know what you think about the ending to Kaiji. Do you like season 2 and the way it ended? Do you think it's better or worse than season 1? Do you think it's about the same? And do you wish that Kaiji got a third season, or at the very least that we got to see that final confrontation with Hyodo? Or are you happy with what we got at the end of season 2 as it stands? Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Until next time, take care everyone. Look forward to the next video.